There's something deeply uncomfortable about pain. Whether it's the sting of rejection, the weight of grief, or the slow burn of unfulfilled dreams, our instinct is always the same: run, avoid, distract. We reach for our phones, binge another series, throw ourselves into work, or numb ourselves with whatever substance promises temporary relief. This is the human condition in the 21st century, a constant flight from discomfort, a relentless pursuit of pleasure, and an unspoken belief that happiness means the absence of suffering. But what if we've gotten it completely wrong? Viktor Frankl, a neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor, discovered something extraordinary in the darkest corners of human experience. Imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, stripped of everything, his family, his manuscript, his freedom, Frankl observed that those who survived weren't necessarily the strongest or the healthiest. They were the ones who had found meaning in their suffering. They were the ones who stopped running from pain and instead asked it a different question: what are you here to teach me? This insight became the foundation of logotherapy, Frankl's revolutionary approach to psychotherapy. The word itself comes from the Greek logos, meaning not just word but meaning. And at its core is a truth that challenges everything our comfort-obsessed culture tells us: that meaning, not happiness, is the primary motivation of human life. Think about the last time you felt truly alive. Chances are, it wasn't when you were lounging on a beach with a cocktail in hand, though that has its place. It was probably when you were pushing through something difficult, finishing a challenging project, supporting a friend through crisis, or overcoming a personal obstacle. There's something in us that comes alive not in the absence of difficulty, but in the presence of purpose. Frankl witnessed this principle play out in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. In the concentration camps, prisoners who had lost all hope would often die within days, regardless of their physical condition. But those who clung to a reason to survive, a manuscript to complete, a family member to reunite with, or even just the determination to bear witness to what they had endured, these individuals found resources they didn't know they possessed. Their suffering didn't disappear, but it transformed into something bearable because it meant something. If you're finding value in this exploration of meaning and suffering, consider subscribing to our channel. We dive deep into life's most important questions, bringing you insights that can transform how you see yourself and your struggles. The modern world has given us unprecedented comfort and convenience, yet we're experiencing epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, and what Frankl called the existential vacuum, a sense of inner emptiness and meaninglessness. We have more ways to avoid pain than ever before, and we're more miserable than ever. This isn't coincidence. It's consequence. When we avoid all pain, we also avoid all growth. We avoid the very experiences that shape character, deepen empathy, and connect us to what matters most. Pain is not the enemy of a good life. It's often the doorway to it. But this requires a radical shift in perspective, one that our culture resists with every fiber of its being. Consider the athlete who pushes through physical discomfort to achieve excellence, or the artist who faces the pain of vulnerability to create something meaningful, or the parent who sacrifices comfort and sleep to nurture a new life. These aren't people who have eliminated suffering from their lives. They're people who have found suffering worth enduring because it serves a purpose larger than themselves. Frankl argued that we can discover meaning in life in 3 different ways: by creating a work or doing a deed, by experiencing something or encountering someone, and by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. That last path, finding meaning through suffering, is perhaps the most controversial and the most profound. It suggests that even when we cannot change our circumstances, we can change ourselves. We retain what Frankl called the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances. This isn't about glorifying pain or seeking it out. Frankl was clear that we should remove suffering when we can. It's about recognizing that some pain is unavoidable, and when we face it rather than flee from it, when we ask what it means rather than why it's happening to us, we discover something unexpected. Our capacity for meaning is greater than our capacity for suffering. The ancient philosophers knew this. The Stoics taught that we don't control what happens to us, only how we respond. Buddhist wisdom speaks of the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain that life shoots at us. The second arrow is the suffering we create by resisting that pain. Christian theology speaks of redemptive suffering. These aren't primitive beliefs to be discarded in our age of comfort. They're timeless truths about the human condition. What would happen if instead of asking, "How can I avoid this pain?" we asked, "What is this pain trying to reveal to me?" What if suffering isn't a design flaw in existence, but a feature that, properly understood, makes us more fully human? What if the meaning we seek isn't found by escaping difficulty, but by embracing it with courage and purpose? These questions aren't abstract philosophy. They're intensely practical. They determine whether we face Monday morning with dread or determination, whether we view our struggles as meaningless obstacles or meaningful challenges, whether we see ourselves as victims of circumstance or authors of our own attitude. Frankl's message, forged in the furnace of unimaginable suffering, is ultimately one of hope. Not the cheap hope of positive thinking or the fantasy that life will be easy, but the robust hope that comes from knowing that no matter what happens to us, we can find meaning in it. And that meaning, not pleasure, is what makes life worth living. We live in a world obsessed with conditions. We tell ourselves, "I'll be happy when I get that promotion. Life will have meaning once I find the right partner. Everything will make sense after I achieve this goal." We've become experts at postponing meaning and making our sense of purpose contingent on external circumstances aligning perfectly with our desires. But Viktor Frankl's revolutionary insight turns this approach on its head. Meaning isn't something we find when conditions are right. It's something we create regardless of conditions. This is what Frankl meant by the unconditional meaning of life. It's the understanding that life asks something of us in every moment, in every situation, no matter how dire or mundane. The question isn't whether life has meaning, but whether we have the courage to respond to the meaning that's already there, waiting to be discovered. In the concentration camps, Frankl observed men who had every reason to despair. They had lost their families, their health, their dignity. They faced death daily. By any rational calculation, their situation was hopeless. Yet some of these prisoners found ways to exercise their humanity even there, sharing their last piece of bread, offering comfort to fellow sufferers, choosing to face their fate with dignity rather than bitterness. They couldn't change their circumstances, but they could change their response to those circumstances. And in that choice, they discovered an unshakable meaning that no external force could take from them. This isn't just inspirational rhetoric. It's a fundamental truth about human nature that Frankl spent decades validating through his therapeutic work. He found that patients who connected with a sense of purpose, even those facing terminal illness or tragic circumstances, experienced less despair and greater resilience than those who had comfortable lives but no sense of meaning. The modern epidemic of depression and anxiety isn't primarily caused by difficult circumstances. Many of the most privileged people in history are also among the most despairing. The existential vacuum that Frankl identified isn't created by too much suffering, but by too little meaning. We've become so focused on eliminating discomfort that we've eliminated the very challenges that give life texture and significance. Are you discovering insights that resonate with your own search for meaning? Subscribe to our channel to continue this journey together. We explore the deepest questions of human existence and how ancient wisdom applies to modern life. Consider the paradox of modern life. We have more comfort, more options, more entertainment than any generation in history. Yet rates of suicide, addiction, and despair continue to climb. We've won the war against many forms of physical suffering, but we're losing the war against meaninglessness. Why? Because we've confused the elimination of pain with the discovery of purpose. Frankl distinguished between three types of values through which we can discover meaning. The first is creative values, what we give to the world through our work, our art, our contributions. This is the meaning we find in creating, building, and leaving something behind. The second is experiential values, what we receive from the world through beauty, love, and encounters with truth. This is the meaning we find in moments of connection, wonder, and appreciation. But it's the third category attitudinal values, that reveals the unconditional nature of meaning. This is the meaning we find through the stance we take toward unavoidable suffering. When we can no longer change our situation, when creative and experiential values seem out of reach, we still possess the freedom to choose our attitude. And in that choice lies a form of meaning that cannot be taken from us. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending that suffering doesn't hurt. Frankl wasn't suggesting we put on a happy face and deny our pain. He was pointing to something deeper, the recognition that even in pain, especially in pain, we have the opportunity to demonstrate our humanity, to show what we're made of, to transform tragedy in a triumph of the human spirit. Think of the parent caring for a chronically ill child. The situation itself is heartbreaking, the suffering real and relentless. But many such parents report finding a depth of purpose and meaning they had never experienced before. Not because the situation is good. It isn't. But because their response to it reveals capacities for love, patience, and courage they didn't know they possessed. The suffering remains suffering, but it's no longer meaningless suffering. It has been transformed into purposeful sacrifice. Or consider the person facing their own mortality after a terminal diagnosis. Frankl would say that even here, especially here, meaning is available. Not in the disease itself, but in how one chooses to face it. Will it be with bitterness and resentment, or with acceptance and grace? Will it prompt deeper connections with loved ones, a reassessment of what truly matters, a final expression of one's values? The circumstances are unchangeable, but the meaning we make of them is entirely within our control. This unconditional quality of meaning has profound implications for how we live. It means we don't need to wait for ideal circumstances to begin living purposefully. It means that no situation, no matter how difficult, is beyond redemption. It means that even our darkest moments can serve a purpose if we choose to let them shape us rather than simply scar us. The freedom to choose our attitude, Frankl insisted, is the last of the human freedoms. It cannot be taken from us by any external force. We can be stripped of possessions, health, loved ones, and liberty, but no one can choose our attitude for us. This is simultaneously humbling and empowering. Humbling because it removes our excuses, empowering because it reveals our ultimate autonomy. In practice, this means shifting from asking, "What do I want from life?" to asking, "What does life want from me?" It's a Copernican revolution of the spirit. We stop placing ourselves at the center and start recognizing that we are the ones being questioned by existence. Each moment presents a unique challenge, a unique opportunity to respond meaningfully. And our response, not our circumstances, determines the quality and meaning of our lives. This perspective doesn't make life easier, but it makes life worthwhile. It transforms us from passive victims awaiting happiness to active participants creating meaning. It suggests that the goal isn't to avoid all suffering, but to ensure that our suffering isn't meaningless. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that meaning isn't found. It's forged moment by moment, choice by choice, attitude by attitude. The unconditional meaning of life isn't a philosophical abstraction. It's an invitation to live fully, right now, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. Because meaning isn't waiting somewhere in our future. It's waiting in our response to this present moment. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. And in that choice lies our growth and our happiness. These words, often attributed to Viktor Frankl, capture the essence of what makes us distinctly human. Not our ability to avoid suffering, but our capacity to choose how we meet it. This is perhaps the most revolutionary and challenging aspect of Frankl's philosophy. We live in a culture that has taught us to see ourselves as products of our circumstances, victims of our past, prisoners of our conditioning. I am the way I am because of how I was raised. We say, I can't help how I feel. Look at what happened to me. We've become experts at explaining why we can't change, why we're stuck, why our circumstances determine our destiny. But Frankl's experience and observations led him to a radically different conclusion. While we cannot always control what happens to us, we always control how we respond to what happens to us. This isn't a small distinction. It's the difference between living as a victim and living as a creator, between being shaped by life and shaping our lives. In the concentration camps, Frankl witnessed the full spectrum of human response to identical circumstances. Some prisoners became brutal, turning on their fellow inmates to secure small advantages. Others became numb, walking corpses who had given up on life before death claimed them. But remarkably, a few became almost saintly, sharing their meager rations, offering words of encouragement, maintaining their humanity against impossible odds. What separated these groups wasn't their circumstances. Everyone faced the same horrors. It wasn't their background or personality traits or previous life experiences. It was their choice. In the midst of conditions designed to strip away every shred of human dignity, some individuals chose to exercise the one freedom that remained, the freedom to choose their attitude toward those conditions. This freedom, Frankl argued, is the last of the human freedoms. You can take away someone's possessions. They still have this freedom. You can take away their health. They still have this freedom. You can take away their loved ones, their liberty, their very life, but until their last breath, they retain the power to choose their attitude. This is what makes dignity possible, even in degradation. What makes heroism possible, even in defeat. What makes meaning possible, even in suffering. If this message of human freedom and dignity is speaking to you, we'd love to have you as part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more content that explores how we can live with greater purpose and resilience, no matter what life brings. But here's the challenging part. With this freedom comes responsibility. If we truly have the power to choose our attitude, then we can no longer blame our circumstances for our misery. We can't point to our past and say, "That's why I'm broken." We can't look at our present situation and say, "That's why I'm stuck." This is uncomfortable because it strips away our excuses and places the burden of our response squarely on our own shoulders. Frankl called this tragic optimism, the ability to remain optimistic despite life's tragic triad of pain, guilt, and death. It's not naive optimism that denies reality or toxic positivity that demands constant cheerfulness. It's the mature recognition that life contains unavoidable suffering, that we all make mistakes and fall short, that death comes for us all. And yet, life remains potentially meaningful right up to its last moment. This optimism is tragic because it doesn't promise that things will work out the way we hope. It doesn't guarantee that our suffering will end, or that justice will prevail, or that love will conquer all. What it does promise is that regardless of what happens, we retain the ability to choose a meaningful response. We can turn suffering into achievement, guilt into growth, and the transitoriness of life into an incentive to take responsible action. Consider someone who has experienced profound trauma, abuse, loss, betrayal. The events themselves cannot be changed. They are part of that person's history, written in stone. But the meaning of those events, the role they play in that person's story, remains open. Will they define themselves as permanently damaged, or as someone who survived and grew stronger? Will their pain make them bitter or empathetic? Will they pass their wounds on to others or transform them into wisdom? These aren't simple choices, and choosing a constructive attitude doesn't erase the pain or make healing instant, but it does determine the trajectory of a life. Two people with identical traumas can end up in completely different places based solely on the attitude they choose to adopt toward their experience. This is equally true for everyday frustrations. The traffic jam that ruins your morning. You can't control it, but you can control whether you spend it in rage or use it as unexpected time to think or listen to something meaningful. The criticism from your boss. You can't control their words, but you can control whether you receive them as an attack or an opportunity to improve. The rejection, the setback, the disappointment. You don't choose whether these happen, but you absolutely choose what they mean and how they shape you. Frankl distinguished between unavoidable suffering and avoidable suffering. Unavoidable suffering is that which cannot be removed without destroying something meaningful. The athlete's muscle pain during training, the artist's vulnerability in sharing their work, the parent's sleepless nights with a newborn. This suffering serves a purpose and should be embraced. Avoidable suffering is that which we create through poor choices, destructive patterns, or refusing to face reality. this suffering should be eliminated. But both types require the same fundamental response, a conscious choice of attitude. With unavoidable suffering, we choose to find meaning in it. With avoidable suffering, we choose to take responsibility for changing it. Either way, we're exercising our freedom to respond, rather than merely react. This power of attitude isn't magical thinking. It doesn't change external reality through positive vibrations or manifestation. What it does is change the reality we experience, the meaning we make, and ultimately, the person we become. A person who chooses gratitude in difficulty becomes grateful. A person who chooses courage in fear becomes courageous. A person who chooses meaning in suffering becomes someone whose life means something. Viktor Frankl emerged from the concentration camps having lost nearly everything: his parents, his brother, his pregnant wife, years of his life, his life's work. By any measure, he had every reason for despair. Instead, he chose to see his experience as having given him unique insights into human nature and the meaning of suffering. He chose to dedicate his remaining years to helping others find meaning in their own struggles. He chose, in short, to transform his tragedy into his life's purpose. This is the ultimate lesson. We are not determined by our conditions, but by our decisions. Life doesn't need to give us what we want for us to find meaning. We need only to give life what it asks of us, our most authentic, courageous, purposeful response to whatever circumstances we face. In that response, regardless of outcome, we discover our humanity and our freedom. We discover that meaning isn't something life owes us, but something we create through the attitude we choose, moment by moment, for the rest of our days.